Hello and welcome to another episode of Analysis Paralysis. This time we are going to examine a few aspects of the debate on metaphorical versus factual truth in a discussion between Jonathan Pageau, Jordan Peterson and Bret Weinstein. The discussion begins with a restatement by Jonathan Pageau of his criticism towards Bret Weinstein.
The argument is that there was a performative contradiction in your statement because you said that factual truth is higher than metaphorical truth, but then to say that there's a top-level truth or that there's an overarching truth is to use a metaphorical structure to demonstrate where you're placing your truth. And so within the statement, there was a performative contradiction in terms of you have to resort to metaphorical truth to speak of hierarchy, because all the language of hierarchy is metaphorical, and therefore to place factual truth at the top of that hierarchy is a performative contradiction. So that's my argument.
So Jonathan implies in his proposition that there are two types of truth, metaphorical and let's call it intellectual. To use Peterson's formulation, metaphorical truth looks at the world as a forum for action, while intellectual truth looks at the world as a place of things. In episode 1 and 2, we talked about how moral values are grounded in metaphorical presuppositions. Hearing Bret talk about values seems to indicate that he does admit that there are a priori values that cannot be understood through the scientific framework.
That the fundamental idea is that you can't select the damn facts and order them, which you have to do. You have to do it without applying an a priori moral framework.
Right. So I would say I am applying an a priori moral framework. I am not treating this as we could also look at the behavior of people as a physical process. It's equally a physical process as it is a moral behavioral process. I'm not doing that. I'm being a human being, and I'm saying from the point of view of values that probably everybody in this room would share.
So let's summarize the development of their argument from this foundation. Without values, Peterson and Pageau suggest, we cannot choose how to act in the world. Throughout the millions of years of evolutionary development, our minds have been shaped towards an embodied understanding of our environment. Through imitation and ritual, we developed our first abstractions of the world. From them arose imagistic representations that were codified in myths, stories, and later on, religions. It is through these mediums, shaped by evolution, that we have developed patterns of behavior based on values that are in harmony with reality. In the last few thousand years, and especially in the last few hundred years, our intellectual methodologies developed to such an extent that we can now use systems of abstractions to describe and manipulate the world to an unprecedented extent. So Jonathan is asking Weinstein, according to what value system does he consider scientific truth to be the top of the hierarchy? Let's hear Weinstein's answer.
So I will plead guilty to using metaphor to defend my position because, of course, language is composed of metaphors, both living and dead, and it's really hard to communicate anything without running afoul of that standard. But I will defend, in spite of that guilt, I will defend the idea that scientific truth is the top truth in the hierarchy, and the reason is really simple. It's because there is no mechanism for sorting between metaphorical truths that belong to different traditions and are in conflict with each other. So, in other words, if we take two, like behave well, when you die you go to heaven, that's cool, you should do that. On the other hand, if you behave well in a Brahman-Atman system, you may be reincarnated as something better than you are now. That's also cool, but it's not the same truth, right? So you can't sort out. These are both kinds of wisdom, and I think we know exactly what kind of wisdom they are, or at least we should, which is if you behave so as to be reincarnated as something better or to go to heaven, what it will do is, in all probability, it will leave your descendants really well positioned in their culture. And that means that your genes, which you might not have been in a position to say anything about, will be well positioned to persist and spread because your descendants will be well placed. So, in effect, going to heaven or being reincarnated as something better than you were are stand-ins for a genetic truth that we can't say. And so what I'm arguing is that what makes the scientific truth hierarchically superior is that it explains all the subordinate truths in a way that is logically consistent. Whereas if you were to prioritize heaven as a truth, then you would have to say, well, reincarnation is therefore false, or you would have to have them all simultaneously be true in some unreconcilable way. So the only one that has the special characteristic of accounting for all the others is the scientific truth.
Bret is making the claim that we can adjudicate metaphorical truths using, in his example, Darwinian thought. That statement points towards a pragmatic epistemology, as Peterson is quick to point out.
I think that what you just did was nested your claim for the validity of scientific truth within a pragmatic framework, which is what I claimed when I was talking to Sam Harris was necessary, because you said, I believe, that the justification for assuming the truth of the mythological representation was its effect on something that's associated with the Darwinian process. Right, and that's how you what you used to justify your claim that it was in fact true.
So, the debate has shifted momentarily from a discussion of metaphorical truth to a discussion about epistemology. It is worth stating here that metaphorical truth is not an epistemology, and pragmatism is not metaphorical truth. It is a philosophical framework that Peterson is using to create a bridge towards metaphorical truth. It is quite fascinating to see the interplay of the two views of the world. Weinstein is always moving towards linguistic truth statements, while Peterson and Pageau return to the question of embodied action. For example, Peterson puts forward the case of melding Ebola and smallpox as a valid scientific pursuit that is morally wrong and thus not true in his epistemology.
But it isn't obvious to me that that's an invalid scientific pursuit. But I do think that it's an invalid ethical pursuit, and so that seems to me to indicate that the ethical pursuit supersedes the scientific pursuit with regards to truth claim.
Bret Weinstein then proceeds to use the concept of truth according to his epistemology and deny the relevance of morality.
I'm going to disagree with you. I would say it doesn't supersede with respect to the truth claim. It supersedes with respect to considerations of behavior and policy. So I absolutely agree with you. There are plenty of scientific truths that are deeply unfortunate.
Jonathan finds this to be the perfect opportunity to clarify what Weinstein is doing, while also addressing his initial example of metaphorical truths.
I want to take what you said, the first thing that you said. Okay. If you're good, you die and you go to heaven. If you're good, you die and you're reincarnated as a higher being. Those two things are the same, okay, in terms of their effect. They are restating of the hierarchy. The hierarchy, religion is all about the hierarchy. That's what religion is about. The restating of the hierarchy in those two terms have the same effect in terms of what we're saying, is that if you're good, you will not meld those two things together. And that is the hierarchy. The hierarchy itself is the capacity to be above quantitative, purely quantitative considerations and to apply qualitative thinking. And the whole language of hierarchy is all a language about a movement from quantity up to quality. Like it's movement. It's going up a mountain. It's going up the base and then going up to unity. And when you stand in that top place, then you can look down and you can judge what facts, because there is an innumerable amounts of facts. There's an infinite quantity of facts. You can decide which facts are worth pursuing. And so that's what religion is, and that's what the hierarchy is. And so if you take a quantitative tidbit of information and you say that is above, let's say, qualitative judgment, how do you even, why are you even focusing on that quantitative data? Because there's an infinite amount of them. So you have to have a manner by which you focus on something. And that is the hierarchy, and that is the whole language of the religious hierarchy. So
notice how Jonathan's thought is really immersed in metaphorical language, which can be quite frustrating to those who do not understand it. What he is saying is, first, the container of the symbol is not the same as the content. In this case, there are two containers, the Christian and Hindu ones, but only one truth. You should strive towards what is good. Second, he claims that Bret's statement declaring scientific truth as primary is incorrect since all interactions with it have to be mediated through a moral choice. At this point, we should present Weinstein's final statement as it seems to encapsulate his view quite well.
My point is, you have 1,000 different belief systems. They're all built out of metaphorical truths and a certain amount of real truth. Let's just stick science in with the rest of them. It's belief system 1,001. Okay, now let's say, well, which of these is best? How are you even going to do that? There's only one of them that has a distinct characteristic. It's number 1,001. What's its distinct characteristic? It explains why all the others work. So how is it not, just by virtue of the fact that it does something that nothing else can, how is it not the top one in the hierarchy?
So the claim is, science is at the top of the hierarchy of metaphorical truths because it can explain how all the other belief systems work. I believe Bret is definitely correct about one thing in this sentence. Only the intellect can potentially explain how belief systems work. Only this does not mean what he thinks it means. You see, science is not metaphorical truth. It is a product of the methodical development of the intellect. Putting them in the same hierarchy, as Weinstein does, is a category error. To provide an illustration, notice the shift in our mode of thinking when making the point that intellectual truth is not another metaphorical truth through the medium of metaphorical truth itself. There is more light here. Someone shown as Redin searching for something on the ground. "What have you lost, mullah?" he asked. "My key," said the mullah, so they both went down on their knees and looked for it. After a time, the other man asked, "Where exactly did you drop it?" "In my own house." "Then why are you looking here?" "Well, there is more light here than inside my own house." The multivalent interplay of symbols in the story is not to be explained through technical jargon. It is to be experienced in the form it is presented. The truth Peterson and Pageau are indicating is to be studied through the stories themselves and not only through intellectual discussion, even if there seems to be more light there. So, back to our sequential presentation. Does its explanatory power make the scientific description the top of the hierarchy? It only makes it the top of the hierarchy if the characteristic of sorting is explanatory power defined as rational articulation. It's worth repeating, metaphorical truth is not a type of intellectual thought. It is a different mode of thinking altogether. Peterson alluded to this a bit earlier in the discussion, after Weinstein offered the case for the explanatory power of science.
So your claim is that because it's very difficult to adjudicate between competing moral systems, that science is preferable with regards to truth claims because there's a way of adjudicating between scientific truths. But I would say the mere fact that it's difficult to adjudicate between competing moral claims doesn't indicate, therefore, that science is a higher truth. It just indicates that science has an advantage when it comes to comparison that ethical systems don't.
Right.
It doesn't mean that ethical systems are perfect.
No. So this is one of these places where I don't exactly know what I'm running afoul of and why. I think my brain is built around some sort of model that makes it hard for me to understand why we could possibly be disagreeing over this.
So yes, indeed. As Bret observes in himself, he is building his thinking around a certain model. It is the model of a totalizing intellect. The reason that him, like Harris, seems stuck is that the intellect can be used to point outside itself, but it can never become something other than what it is. To put it simply, purely intellectual methodologies are as successful a vehicle for metaphorical truth as the metaphorical methodologies are for the implementation of computer software. The solution seems quite obvious. The higher truth has to be what will arise from the proper use of both faculties as translated into action according to the requirements of time, place, and people. Thank you for watching.